In the heart of
Please,
London,
you have to
where
help me.
centuries-old
I cannot,
traditions
my
meet
orders are
modern
clear.
dangers,
But I'm
one
scared.
man's
Stay
dedication would be tested beyond
scared.
imagination.
Don't be
Detective
afraid.
Inspector
I'm here.
James Morrison
Promise?
never
I
thought
promise.
his military background would lead him to become the shadow that follows Britain's most beloved young royal. But when a series of anonymous letters arrived at Kensington Palace, each more chilling than the last, everything changed. The letters weren't just threats. They contained detailed knowledge of Princess Charlotte's daily routines, her favorite hiding spots in the palace gardens, and even the specific times she fed the palace corgis. Someone was watching, someone was planning, and someone had to stop them. What started as a routine security assignment would become a deadly game of cat and mouse, where one wrong move could endanger not just a princess, but the future of the monarchy itself. This is the true story of how an ordinary man became an extraordinary guardian, and how far he would go to protect innocence in a world full of shadows. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Detective Inspector James Morrison stood at attention in the marble-lined corridor of Kensington Palace, his trained eyes scanning every shadow and corner. The morning sun filtered through ancient windows, casting long patterns across the polished floors where generations of royalty had walked. At 42, James had seen enough of London's dark underbelly to know that danger could lurk anywhere, even in the most sacred places. His journey to this moment had been anything but ordinary. Born in a working-class neighborhood in East London, James had learned early that life was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. His father, a dock worker, had instilled in him the values of duty and service. His mother, a nurse, had taught him compassion and the importance of putting others first. The army had shaped him into the man he was today. 12 years of service, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, had honed his instincts and taught him to read people like open books. He could spot trouble from across a crowded room and sense danger before it materialized. These skills had served him well when he joined the Metropolitan Police, where he quickly rose through the ranks. But nothing had prepared him for the call that came on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. Commander Sarah Wellington, head of Royal Protection, had summoned him to her office overlooking the Thames. The meeting that would change his life forever lasted exactly 17 minutes. "Morrison," she had said, sliding a thin file across her desk, "we have a situation that requires someone with your particular skills. Someone is targeting Princess Charlotte, and we need our best man on the case." The file contained photographs and transcripts that made James's blood run cold. 5 letters, each more disturbing than the last, had arrived at the palace over the past month. The first had seemed like harmless fan mail from an overeager admirer. The second had contained specific details about the princess's daily schedule. By the 5th letter, the writer was describing in chilling detail how they planned to take the princess away from the corrupt royal family and give her the life she deserves. What made the letters particularly alarming was the level of inside knowledge they displayed. The writer knew that Princess Charlotte had a small birthmark behind her left ear. They knew she was afraid of thunderstorms and slept with a stuffed elephant named Peanut. They knew she sneaked extra biscuits from the kitchen when her nanny wasn't looking. This wasn't some random obsession. This was someone with access, someone who had been watching and studying the young royal for months, possibly years. James accepted the assignment without hesitation. Within 24 hours, he had moved into a small apartment near the palace and begun his new life as Princess Charlotte's shadow. His official title was Special Protection Officer, but his real job was to be everywhere she was, to see everything she saw, and to be ready for anything. The first week was about observation and adaptation. Princess Charlotte was 7 years old, bright and curious, with her father's mischievous smile and her grandmother's sense of duty. She attended Thomas's school in Battersea, where she was known simply as Charlotte Cambridge to her classmates. She took ballet lessons on Wednesdays, piano on Fridays, and spent weekends exploring the palace grounds with her younger brother Louis and older brother George. James learned her routines, her preferences, her fears, and her joys. He discovered that she loved horses and could name every breed in the royal stables. She was fascinated by the palace's history and often asked the staff to tell her stories about the kings and queens who had lived there before her. She had a particular fondness for Queen Victoria and had read every children's book about her she could find. But it was during his second week that James realized the true scope of the threat they were facing. He was reviewing security footage from the palace grounds when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. In the background of a recording from the previous Tuesday, partially hidden behind a maintenance shed, was a figure with a camera pointed directly at the window of Charlotte's playroom. The figure appeared in 3 different recordings over the span of 2 weeks, always in different locations, always watching. The palace's extensive security system, designed to keep intruders out, had somehow failed to detect someone who had been studying the princess's movements for weeks. James immediately contacted the technical team and ordered a complete review of all security footage from the past 3 months. What they found was deeply disturbing. The mysterious watcher had been present at least a dozen times, sometimes dressed as a maintenance worker, other times as a delivery person, once even appearing to be a tourist taking photographs of the palace's exterior. The breakthrough came when James noticed a distinctive limp in the figure's gait. The person favored their left leg, a detail that would prove crucial in identifying them. Cross-referencing this information with palace employee records, delivery schedules, and maintenance logs, the investigation team was able to narrow down their suspect list to 3 individuals. Meanwhile, the letters continued to arrive, each one more threatening than the last. The 6th letter, delivered on a Thursday morning, contained a photograph of Princess Charlotte walking to her ballet lesson. The photo had been taken from inside the building across the street, proving that the stalker had found a way to get close despite the increased security measures. "She looks so innocent," the letter read. "Soon she'll understand that her family has been lying to her about everything. Soon she'll come with me willingly, and we'll start a new life together, far from the corruption and lies of the palace." James felt a cold fury building inside him as he read those words. This wasn't just about protecting a member of the royal family anymore. This was about protecting a child who deserved to grow up safe and happy, free from the shadows of those who would exploit her position for their own twisted purposes. The pressure was mounting from all directions. The palace wanted answers. The media, thankfully still unaware of the specific threats, was beginning to ask questions about the increased security presence around the young royals. Most importantly, Princess Charlotte herself was starting to notice that something was different. "Mr. James," she asked him one afternoon as they walked through the palace gardens, "why do you always look so serious? Are you worried about something?" Her innocent question cut through him like a knife. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that someone out there wants to hurt her without destroying her sense of safety and wonder? How do you protect her childhood while preparing for the worst? "I'm just making sure you're safe, Princess," he replied gently. "That's my job, and I take it very seriously because you're very important." She seemed satisfied with that answer and skipped ahead to chase a butterfly that had landed on a nearby rosebush. But James knew that the threats were escalating and time was running out. The letters were arriving more frequently now, sometimes 2 or 3 per week. The tone was becoming more urgent, more desperate. The investigation team had identified their primary suspect, Marcus Whitmore, a former palace groundskeeper who had been dismissed 6 months earlier for inappropriate behavior toward female staff members. Whitmore had a military background, which explained his ability to evade security measures, and a history of mental health issues that had worsened after his dismissal. But when police went to his last known address, they found an empty apartment with evidence that he had been planning something big. Maps of London with various routes highlighted, photographs of the palace and surrounding areas, and most disturbing of all, children's clothing in Princess Charlotte's size, still bearing store tags. Whitmore had vanished without a trace, but the evidence suggested he was preparing to act on his threats very soon. The investigation had reached a critical point. They knew who they were looking for, but they had no idea where he was or when he might strike. James increased his vigilance, never letting Princess Charlotte out of his sight for more than a few seconds. He coordinated with palace security to implement additional measures, extra guards at all entry points, thorough background checks on all new staff and visitors, and constant monitoring of the perimeter. But despite all these precautions, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Whitmore had been planning this for months, possibly years. He knew the palace's routines and security procedures. He had demonstrated an ability to get close to his target despite multiple layers of protection. The 8th letter arrived on a Friday evening. and its contents made everyone's blood run cold. Unlike the previous letters, this one contained specific details about an event that hadn't been publicly announced yet. Princess Charlotte's planned visit to a local children's hospital the following Tuesday. The visit was supposed to be a surprise known only to a select group of palace staff and security personnel. Someone was still feeding information to Whitmore, or he had found another way to monitor the palace's activities. Either way, the threat level had just escalated dramatically. The hospital visit would have to be canceled, but that would only delay the inevitable. Whitmore was getting bolder, more confident, and more dangerous with each passing day. As James stood guard outside Princess Charlotte's bedroom that night, listening to her peaceful breathing and watching the shadows dance across the corridor walls, he made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whoever he had to face, he would not let any harm come to the innocent child under his protection. The real test of his resolve was about to begin, and failure was not an option. The palace might have been a fortress, but James knew that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who had once been trusted friends. Somewhere out there in the darkness of London, Marcus Whitmore was making his final preparations, and soon the game of cat and mouse would reach its deadly conclusion. The morning of the planned hospital visit dawned gray and overcast, with thick clouds hanging low over London like a heavy blanket. James had been awake since 4 a.m, reviewing security protocols and coordinating with the expanded protection team. The decision to cancel Princess Charlotte's visit had been made, but the investigation team had developed a new strategy that would use the planned event as bait to draw Whitmore into the open. Princess Charlotte was disappointed about the canceled hospital visit, but her parents had explained it as a scheduling conflict. She spent the morning in her private lessons, unaware that every person in the building was on high alert. James watched her through the classroom window as she practiced her French pronunciation with her tutor, Miss Adelaide. The sight of her innocent concentration on her studies only strengthened his determination to end this nightmare. The breakthrough they had been waiting for came at 11:30 that morning. Detective Sergeant Karen Phillips burst into the command center with news that changed everything. "We've found him," she announced breathlessly. "Whitmore is staying at a bed and breakfast in Hammersmith under a false name. The owner recognized his photograph and called it in 20 minutes ago." James felt a surge of adrenaline as he processed this information. Finally, they had a concrete location, but his years of experience had taught him to be cautious about seemingly easy victories. "How reliable is this information?" he asked Phillips. "Very reliable," she replied. "The owner, Mrs. Chen, says he's been there for 3 days. She noticed him because he kept asking questions about bus routes to central London, and seemed particularly interested in the schedules for routes that pass near the palace. When she saw his photograph on the news this morning, she knew immediately it was the same man." The team moved quickly to establish surveillance on the bed and breakfast. Within an hour, they had confirmed that Marcus Whitmore was indeed staying there, though he hadn't been seen since early morning. His room showed signs of recent occupation, and most importantly, they found additional evidence of his plans to target Princess Charlotte. Hidden under his mattress was a detailed floor plan of the children's hospital where the visit was supposed to take place. The plan showed potential entry and exit routes, security camera locations, and even the specific room where Princess Charlotte was scheduled to meet with young patients. Whitmore had done extensive reconnaissance work, proving that his obsession had driven him to extraordinary lengths. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten timeline that outlined his intended plan for that very day. According to his notes, he had planned to pose as a hospital volunteer and approach Princess Charlotte during her visit. The plan included detailed preparations for what he called extraction and relocation to a remote cottage he had apparently rented in the Scottish Highlands. James studied the timeline with growing unease. Whitmore's plan was sophisticated and well-researched. He had clearly spent months preparing for this moment, and the level of detail suggested he had inside knowledge of royal security procedures. This wasn't the work of an amateur or someone acting on impulse. "He's not at the bed and breakfast," reported Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, who was leading the surveillance team. "Mrs. Chen says he left early this morning with a large sports bag and hasn't returned. She overheard him making a phone call about meeting someone at Victoria Station." The mention of Victoria Station sent alarm bells ringing through James's mind. The station was one of London's busiest transport hubs, with connections to all parts of the city and beyond. If Whitmore was planning to leave London with Princess Charlotte, Victoria Station would be the perfect place to disappear into the crowd. But something about the timeline bothered James. According to Whitmore's notes, he was supposed to be at the hospital right now, implementing his plan to approach the princess. The fact that the visit had been cancelled meant his timeline was already disrupted. People like Whitmore, with their obsessive personalities and carefully laid plans, often became unpredictable when their expectations were shattered. James made a decision that would prove crucial. Instead of focusing all their resources on tracking Whitmore through London's transport system, he convinced the team to maintain heavy security around Princess Charlotte while setting up a trap that would draw the stalker back to familiar territory. The double area has been disrupted. "He's going to come to the palace," James announced to the assembled security team. His original plan has been disrupted, but his obsession with Princess Charlotte hasn't disappeared. He'll look for another opportunity to get close to her, and he knows the palace grounds better than anywhere else. The plan was risky but logical. They would increase visible security around the palace to make it appear that they were in defensive mode, while actually setting up multiple layers of concealed surveillance to catch Whitmore when he inevitably attempted to get closer to his target. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte was moved to the most secure part of the palace, surrounded by protection officers who had been briefed on every aspect of the threat. James remained her primary guardian, staying within arm's reach at all times. She was beginning to sense that something serious was happening, asking more frequent questions about why there were so many new faces around the palace. "Are we playing a game, Mr. James?" she asked during lunch, noticing the way he constantly scanned the room and spoke quietly into his radio. "It feels like everyone is pretending something exciting is about to happen." James struggled with how to respond. Her innocent perception of the situation as a game was both heartbreaking and encouraging. It meant that despite everything, her childhood sense of security remained intact. "Something like that, Princess," he replied carefully. "We're just making sure everything is extra safe today." The afternoon brought unexpected developments. Analysis of Whitmore's belongings at the bed and breakfast revealed a second cell phone that contained text messages from an unknown contact. The messages were cryptic but suggested that Whitmore had been receiving assistance from someone else. "The package will be delivered as discussed. Read one message. Remember, timing is everything," read another. This revelation transformed their understanding of the threat. Whitmore wasn't working alone. He had an accomplice, possibly someone with access to palace information. The investigation team immediately began reviewing all palace staff, suppliers, and regular visitors for any possible connections to Whitmore. The answer came from an unexpected source. Princess Charlotte's piano teacher, Miss Rebecca Taylor, had been employed by the palace for 8 months. During routine background verification prompted by the new security concerns, investigators discovered that she had been in a romantic relationship with Marcus Whitmore before his dismissal from the palace grounds crew. Miss Taylor had been the source of inside information about Princess Charlotte's schedules, preferences, and habits. She had been feeding details to Whitmore for months, believing she was helping him cope with the depression and anger he felt after losing his job. According to her statement to police, she had no idea that Whitmore was planning to kidnap the princess, but her cooperation had made her an unwitting accomplice to a serious crime, and more importantly, she had revealed a crucial piece of information. Whitmore had told her he would be visiting Charlotte one last time that evening, around 6 o'clock, when she would normally be having her dinner in the palace's private dining room. James felt his heart rate increase as he processed this timeline. 6 o'clock was less than 4 hours away, and they still had no idea how Whitmore planned to breach the palace's security systems. His experience as a former groundskeeper would give him knowledge of maintenance tunnels, service entrances, and blind spots in the surveillance network that even current security personnel might not be aware of. The palace was immediately put on lockdown. All non-essential staff were evacuated, and every entrance, exit, and potential hiding spot was thoroughly searched by teams of officers with specially trained dogs. Princess Charlotte was moved to the palace's most secure room, a reinforced chamber originally designed as a safe room during World War II. But as 6 o'clock approached, James realized they had made a critical error. In focusing on protecting Princess Charlotte, they had given Whitmore exactly what he wanted: confirmation that she was in the palace and vulnerable. His plan had never been to kidnap her during a public appearance. It had always been to force a confrontation at the place where she felt safest. At 5:45, the palace's perimeter alarms began sounding. Security cameras showed a figure moving through the garden, staying in the shadows but clearly heading toward the main building. The figure matched Whitmore's height and build, and moved with the confident familiarity of someone who knew exactly where he was going. James positioned himself between Princess Charlotte and the room's only entrance, his hand resting on his weapon but hoping he wouldn't need to use it in the presence of a child. The other protection officers took positions around the room, creating multiple layers of defense. "What's happening, Mr. James?" Princess Charlotte asked, her voice smaller now as she began to understand that this wasn't a game. "Are we in danger?" James knelt down to her level, looking directly into her wide blue eyes. "Princess, I need you to stay very quiet and do exactly what I tell you, okay? There's someone outside who shouldn't be here, and we're going to make sure you stay safe until they're gone." She nodded solemnly, showing a maturity beyond her 7 years. In that moment, James saw not just a frightened child, but a future queen who was learning that duty sometimes required courage in the face of danger. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside grew closer, accompanied by the urgent voices of security personnel coordinating their response. James knew that the next few minutes would determine not just Princess Charlotte's safety, but possibly the future of royal security protocols. Everything he had trained for, everything he believed in, came down to this moment. The door handle began to turn, and James tensed for what was about to come. The door opened slowly, and James felt every muscle in his body coil like a spring ready to release. But instead of Marcus Whitmore, Detective Inspector Sarah Collins appeared, her face grim but relieved. "False alarm on this floor," she reported through her radio. "Target is still in the garden area, moving toward the east wing." James released a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, but his relief was short-lived. The East Wing housed the palace's administrative offices and the kitchens, areas that Whitmore would know intimately from his time as a groundskeeper. More concerning was the fact that the East Wing also contained several passages that connected to the tunnel system beneath the palace. "He's trying to get into the building through the service tunnels," James realized aloud. "He knows we've locked down all the main entrances, so he's going for the underground access points." Princess Charlotte remained remarkably calm, despite the obvious tension around her. She had seated herself in the corner of the safe room, clutching her stuffed elephant Peanut, and watching the adults with the intense focus children often display during serious situations they don't fully understand. "Mr. James," she said quietly, "the man who's trying to get in, is he the one who's been sending me those strange letters?" James was surprised that she knew about the letters. Her question revealed that despite everyone's efforts to shield her from the full extent of the threat, she had been more aware of the situation than anyone had realized. "Yes, Princess," he answered honestly. "But we're not going to let him hurt you or scare you anymore." The palace's underground tunnel system was a maze of passages that had been constructed over centuries for various purposes. Some dated back to medieval times when they were used to move supplies and provide escape routes during sieges. Others had been added during World War II as bomb shelters and secure communication centers. Most recently, modern service tunnels had been installed to house electrical and communication cables. Whitmore's knowledge of these tunnels gave him a significant advantage, but it also created opportunities for the security team. Unlike the palace's main areas, the tunnel system had limited access points and fewer routes to navigate. If they could trap him underground, they could control the situation more effectively. James made the difficult decision to leave Princess Charlotte with the other protection officers, while he joined the search team in the tunnels. His military experience in confined spaces and his growing understanding of Whitmore's psychology made him uniquely qualified to track the intruder through the underground labyrinth. "I don't want you to go," Princess Charlotte said as James prepared to leave. Her words carried a weight that went beyond the immediate situation. In the short time he had been protecting her, they had developed a bond that transcended his professional duties. She trusted him completely, and he had come to care for her welfare with an intensity that surprised him. "I'll be back very soon," he promised. "And when I return, this will all be over, and you'll be safe." The entrance to the tunnel system was accessed through a hidden panel in the palace's basement. James joined Detective Inspector Collins and 4 other officers as they prepared to descend into the passages beneath their feet. Each officer was equipped with night vision goggles, communication equipment, and detailed maps of the tunnel network. The tunnels were darker and more extensive than James had expected. Some sections were well-maintained, modern corridors with proper lighting and ventilation. Others were ancient stone passages that felt like something from a medieval castle. The air was cool and still, carrying sounds in unexpected ways that made it difficult to determine direction and distance. They had been searching for almost 20 minutes when they heard it, a scraping sound echoing through the passages, followed by what sounded like someone talking quietly to themselves. The sounds were coming from the section of tunnels that led toward the palace's main residential areas, exactly where James had feared Whitmore would head. Moving carefully through the narrow passages, the team followed the sounds deeper into the tunnel system. The passages here were older, with uneven floors and low ceilings that forced them to move in single file. James led the group, using hand signals to communicate their progress to the officers behind him. They found Whitmore in a circular chamber beneath the palace's central courtyard. He was standing in front of an old wooden door that led to one of the original medieval passages. But what shocked James was Whitmore's appearance. The man looked haggard and desperate, his clothes dirty from crawling through the tunnels, his eyes wild with an obsession that had clearly consumed his entire being. "Marcus Whitmore," James called out, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "This is Detective Inspector Morrison. You need to stop where you are and surrender peacefully." Whitmore spun around, and James saw something in his expression that was both tragic and terrifying. This wasn't just a criminal who had been caught in the act. This was a man whose mental illness had twisted his reality to the point where he genuinely believed he was rescuing Princess Charlotte from some imagined danger. "You don't understand," Whitmore said, his voice shaking with emotion. "She's being held prisoner up there. They're poisoning her mind, teaching her to be like them. I can give her a real life, away from all the lies and corruption." James had dealt with mentally ill suspects before, but never in a situation with such high stakes. He needed to de-escalate the situation without triggering a violent response, while also ensuring that Whitmore couldn't reach Princess Charlotte. "Marcus, I can see that you care about Princess Charlotte's welfare," he said carefully, "but taking her away from her family isn't going to help her. She's happy where she is." "No!" Whitmore shouted, the sound reverberating through the tunnels. "You're lying just like all the rest of them. I've been watching her for months." I can see the sadness in her eyes. She needs someone who truly understands her, someone who can give her the freedom she deserves. The delusion was so complete that James realized rational argument would be impossible. Whitmore had constructed an entire fantasy around his obsession with Princess Charlotte, and any attempt to challenge that fantasy would only make him more desperate and unpredictable. But then Whitmore did something that changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. He reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be a small explosive device. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice breaking. "But if I can't save her, then at least I can make sure they can't corrupt her anymore." James felt his blood turn to ice. This wasn't just about kidnapping anymore. Whitmore's obsession had driven him to the point where he was willing to destroy what he claimed to love rather than leave it in the hands of others. The explosive device was small but could cause significant damage in the confined space of the tunnels, potentially affecting the structural integrity of the palace above. "Marcus, listen to me," James said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Princess Charlotte is safe upstairs, and she's happy. She doesn't know anything about corruption or lies. She's just a little girl who loves horses and reads books about Queen Victoria. You don't want to hurt someone who's innocent." For a moment, something flickered in Whitmore's eyes that suggested he might be reaching a moment of clarity. But then the delusion reasserted itself, and he shook his head violently. "You're trying to trick me," he said. "I know what I have to do." James realized that words alone weren't going to resolve this situation. He signaled to the other officers to position themselves for a coordinated response while he continued to engage Whitmore in conversation. The key was to keep the man talking while gradually closing the distance between them. "Tell me about the letters you've been writing," James said, taking a small step forward. "You obviously put a lot of thought into them. You care deeply about Princess Charlotte's well-being." Whitmore's expression softened slightly at the mention of his letters. "I wanted her to understand," he said. "I wanted her to know that someone saw through the facade. Someone who truly cared about her future." Every letter was a promise that she wouldn't have to live a lie forever. James took another step closer. He was now within 10 feet of Whitmore, close enough to see the sweat on the man's face and the trembling in his hands as he held the explosive device. She would appreciate knowing that someone cares about her, James said, but she would want that person to be safe and happy too. She wouldn't want anyone to get hurt because of her. The mention of Princess Charlotte's feelings seemed to resonate with Whitmore in a way that previous arguments hadn't. For the first time since they had found him, he appeared to be considering the consequences of his actions beyond his own obsessive goals. "She's just a child," James continued, now close enough to see the tears forming in Whitmore's eyes. "She deserves to grow up surrounded by people who love her and want what's best for her. That includes her family, and it includes you finding help for the pain you're feeling." The breakthrough came suddenly. Whitmore's hand began to shake more violently as the weight of his actions finally began to penetrate the wall of delusion he had built around himself. "I just wanted to help her," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the stone chamber. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." James seized the moment of vulnerability. Moving quickly but carefully, he reached out and gently took the explosive device from Whitmore's trembling hands. The man didn't resist. Instead, he collapsed against the tunnel wall and began sobbing uncontrollably. The other officers moved in to secure Whitmore while James examined the device he had taken. To his relief, it appeared to be a crude construction that wasn't actually armed or dangerous. Whitmore's delusion had extended to his bomb-making abilities as well. The device was more of a prop than a genuine threat. As they escorted Whitmore through the tunnels toward the surface, James felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the immediate threat was over, anger at the months of fear and stress that had been inflicted on Princess Charlotte and her family, and surprising sympathy for a man whose mental illness had led him down such a destructive path. But the most overwhelming feeling was the need to return to Princess Charlotte and reassure her that the nightmare was finally over. She had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal, and she deserved to know that her trust in the people protecting her had been justified. When they emerged from the tunnels, the evening sun was setting over London, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. James looked up at the windows of the safe room where Princess Charlotte was waiting and knew that his job was almost complete. Almost, but not quite. There was still one more conversation he needed to have. When James returned to the safe room, he found Princess Charlotte exactly where he had left her, sitting quietly in the corner with Peanut clutched in her arms. But her eyes were different now. The innocent curiosity that had characterized her questions throughout the ordeal had been replaced by a more mature understanding that something serious and frightening had been happening around her. "Is it over, Mr. James?" she asked simply. "Yes, Princess," he replied, kneeling down beside her. "The man who was trying to get into the palace has been caught, and he won't be able to bother you anymore. You're completely safe now." She nodded solemnly, processing this information with the remarkable resilience that children often display in difficult situations. "Was he very sad?" she asked after a moment. "The man, I mean. He must have been very sad to want to hurt people." James was struck by her capacity for empathy, even towards someone who had threatened her safety. It was a quality that would serve her well in her future role, but it also reminded him of how much innocence she had been forced to confront in the past few weeks. "Yes, Princess," he said honestly. He was very sad and very confused. Sometimes when people are hurting inside, they make very bad choices. But that's not your fault, and it's not something you need to worry about. The immediate aftermath of Whitmore's capture was a whirlwind of activity. Police statements, security reviews, media management, and the complex process of ensuring that such a breach could never happen again. The palace's security protocols underwent a complete overhaul, with new procedures for background checks, tunnel monitoring, and threat assessment. Miss Rebecca Taylor, the piano teacher who had unknowingly aided Whitmore, was arrested but later released with a warning after cooperating fully with the investigation. Her relationship with Whitmore had ended months before the stalking began, and psychiatric evaluation confirmed that she had genuinely believed she was helping a friend through a difficult period rather than enabling a dangerous obsession. Marcus Whitmore himself was committed to a secure psychiatric facility for comprehensive evaluation and treatment. The assessment revealed a complex combination of depression, delusional disorder, and attachment issues that had been exacerbated by the trauma of losing his job and social isolation. His obsession with Princess Charlotte had been a manifestation of his need to feel important and needed, twisted by mental illness into something dangerous and destructive. But the most significant change was in James himself. The weeks of constant vigilance, the responsibility for protecting someone so precious and vulnerable, and the intensity of the final confrontation had affected him in ways he was still trying to understand. He had gone into the assignment as a professional doing his job. He was coming out of it as someone who had formed a genuine bond with the child he had protected. 3 days after Whitmore's arrest, James received an unexpected summons to meet with Prince William and Princess Kate. The meeting took place in the palace's private study, a comfortable room filled with family photographs and children's artwork that reminded him of the real people behind the royal titles. "Inspector Morrison," Prince William began, "we can never adequately express our gratitude for what you've done for our family, and especially for Charlotte. Your dedication and professionalism under extraordinary circumstances have been exemplary." Princess Kate added, "Charlotte has spoken about you constantly since this ordeal began. She trusts you completely, and that trust has been the thing that allowed her to remain calm and secure throughout this frightening experience." James felt a mixture of pride and humility at their words. "Your Highnesses, protecting Princess Charlotte has been both a privilege and an honor. She is a remarkable child, and she handled this situation with courage that many adults would envy. Which brings us to why we asked to meet with you today," Prince William continued. "We would like to offer you a permanent position as Charlotte's primary protection officer. We understand that this would represent a significant change in your career path, but we believe that the bond of trust that has developed between you and our daughter is invaluable." The offer was both tempting and daunting. James had grown genuinely fond of Princess Charlotte, and the idea of continuing to be part of her life as she grew up was appealing. But it would also mean accepting a role that would require him to subordinate his own life and career ambitions to the needs of protecting someone else. "I'm honored by your offer," James replied carefully, "but I would like some time to consider what this would mean for my future and to discuss it with my superiors at the Metropolitan Police." "Of course," Princess Kate said. "Take all the time you need. Charlotte has asked if you'll continue to be around the palace while you make your decision, and we would welcome that." Over the following weeks, as James continued his temporary assignment while considering the permanent position, he had many opportunities to observe Princess Charlotte's recovery from the trauma she had experienced. Children, he learned, are remarkably resilient, but they also process difficult experiences in ways that adults don't always expect. Charlotte had nightmares for several nights after Whitmore's arrest, but they gradually subsided as the palace returned to normal routines. She asked thoughtful questions about why someone would want to hurt her family, leading to age-appropriate conversations about the responsibilities and challenges that come with being royal. "Mr. James," she said one afternoon as they walked through the palace gardens, "when I grow up and become queen someday, will there always be people who want to hurt me?" It was the kind of question that went to the heart of royal existence, touching on themes of duty, sacrifice, and the price of public service that she would need to understand as she matured. "Princess," James replied thoughtfully, "being royal means that some people will have strong feelings about you and your family, both positive and negative. But it also means you'll always have people whose job it is to keep you safe, and you'll have the power to do good things for many people. The important thing is to never let fear stop you from being kind and doing what you believe is right." She seemed satisfied with this answer, skipping ahead to examine a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. But James could see that she was processing these complex ideas about her future in her own 7-year-old way, developing the mental framework she would need to handle the unique pressures of her position. The decision about his own future became clearer as James observed these changes in Princess Charlotte. He realized that his role had evolved beyond simple protection into something more like mentorship and guidance. She looked to him not just as someone who kept her safe, but as someone who helped her understand the world around her and her place in it. Commander Wellington had made it clear that accepting the permanent position would be a significant career move that would open doors to the highest levels of Royal Protection Service. But more importantly, James had come to understand that his relationship with Princess Charlotte represented something unique and valuable that went beyond professional obligations. He made his decision on a Thursday morning in late May, as he watched Princess Charlotte practice her French conversation with her tutor. She was laughing at her own pronunciation mistakes, showing the joy and confidence of a child who felt completely secure in her environment. The transformation from the frightened girl in the safe room to this happy, confident student was something James had helped make possible. "Your Highnesses," he told Prince William and Princess Kate that afternoon, "I would be honored to accept the position as Princess Charlotte's permanent protection officer." The announcement was made quietly within palace circles, with no public fanfare or media attention. James Morrison officially became part of the royal household, with apartment in the palace staff quarters and a salary that reflected his new status as one of the most trusted members of the royal protection team. Princess Charlotte's reaction to the news was characteristic of her straightforward personality. "Good," she said simply when her parents told her James would be staying. "I knew he wouldn't leave us." As James settled into his new role, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. From a working-class childhood in East London to military service in Afghanistan, from detective work in the Metropolitan Police to protecting one of the most famous children in the world, his life had taken unexpected turns that he never could have predicted. But the most unexpected turn was the realization that his work had evolved from protecting a royal symbol into caring for a real person who happened to be royal. Princess Charlotte was not just a princess. She was a bright, curious, kind-hearted child who deserved the chance to grow up feeling safe and loved. The threat from Marcus Whitmore had been neutralized, but James knew that his job was just beginning. As Princess Charlotte grew older, new challenges and threats would emerge. The world was changing rapidly, with social media, international terrorism, and political instability creating security challenges that previous generations of royal protection officers had never had to consider. But James also knew that he had found his calling. Protecting Princess Charlotte wasn't just a job. It was a mission that gave meaning and purpose to all his training and experience. He had helped a frightened child feel safe again, and in the process he had discovered something about himself that he hadn't known was there. 6 months later, as James stood in the palace gardens watching Princess Charlotte feed the royal swans with her brothers, he received a letter that brought the story full circle. Marcus Whitmore, writing from the psychiatric facility where he was receiving treatment, had sent a carefully worded apology for the fear and disruption he had caused. "I understand now that my illness made me believe things that weren't true," Whitmore wrote. "I hope Princess Charlotte can forgive an old man who lost his way. Please tell her that I am getting better and that I wish her happiness and safety always." James read the letter twice before deciding whether to share it with Princess Charlotte's parents. In the end, he felt they had a right to know that Whitmore was making progress in his recovery. The letter would be kept in the security files, but it wouldn't be shared with Princess Charlotte herself unless she specifically asked about the man who had once threatened her safety. As the sun set over London that evening, casting golden light across the palace grounds, James made his evening security rounds with a sense of satisfaction and purpose he had never felt before. Princess Charlotte was safe, happy, and growing into the remarkable young woman she was destined to become. And he would be there every step of the way, watching over her and protecting not just her physical safety, but the childhood wonder and kindness that made her special. The threat that had made him essential had passed, but James Morrison had found something more valuable than he had ever imagined: a chance to make a real difference in the life of someone who would someday make a difference in the lives of millions. In protecting Princess Charlotte, he had discovered his own purpose, and in her trust, he had found a reason to be the best guardian he could possibly be. The Royal Guard's watch would continue, day after day, year after year, ensuring that innocence could flourish even in a world full of shadows. And in that mission, James had found not just a job, but a calling that would define the rest of his life.